My name is Emily, and I'm 26. I was lying in that hospital bed, my body aching, stitches pulling with every breath. The room smelled of antiseptic, and monitors beeped softly. I was barely awake when I heard my parents' voices low and sharp. "Take her organ," they said. "Save our son." My mother's voice cut deeper. "She's just a burden." My heart stopped. They didn't know I was awake, hearing every word. Have you ever been betrayed by the ones you love most? Like and subscribe to hear what I did next. Where are you watching from? Let me know below. I lay there, the hospital blanket scratching my skin, my mind stuck on those words. My parents' voices echoed in my head, sharp and cold like a knife I couldn't pull out. I was 26. Emily, the daughter who'd always done what was needed, and now I was just a burden. My stitches throbbed, a dull reminder of the surgery I didn't fully understand. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in as I tried to piece together how I'd ended up here. I thought back to when I was a kid, maybe 12, in our little house in Ohio. The kitchen always smelled of coffee and my mom's cinnamon rolls. I'd sit at the table helping Lucas with his homework. He was 8, small for his age, his face pale from his kidney issues. I'd draw funny faces on his worksheets to make him laugh, his giggles filling the room. I loved being his big sister, the one who could make things okay. But even then, I noticed how my parents' eyes lit up for him in a way they never did for me. One spring, I'd worked hard on a science project, a model of the solar system I'd spent weeks gluing together. I won first place at school, my chest swelling with pride as I carried the ribbon home. I couldn't wait to show Mom and Dad. When I burst through the door, Mom was on the phone scheduling Lucas's next doctor's appointment. Dad was packing a bag for the hospital. I held up the ribbon, my voice shaky with excitement. Mom glanced over, nodded, and said, "Nice, honey," before turning back to her call. Dad ruffled my hair and muttered, "Good job," but his eyes were on Lucas, curled up on the couch. I stood there, the ribbon heavy in my hand, telling myself it didn't matter. Lucas needed them more. I was fine. But was I lying in that hospital bed? The memory stung differently. I'd always been the strong one, the one who didn't complain. I'd skip sleepovers to watch Lucas clean the house when Mom was too tired, even donate blood when the doctors asked. I was 16 the first time, nervous, but proud, thinking I was saving my brother. The nurse had smiled, saying I was brave. Mom hugged me after, but her eyes were already on Lucas's chart. I told myself it was okay. I was helping. That's what family did. Now the hospital room was quiet, except for the hum of machines. My abdomen ached, the pain radiating with every breath. I didn't know why I'd had surgery, not really. The doctors had been vague, saying it was urgent, something about my health. But those words I'd overheard, "Take her organs, save our son," twisted in my gut. Had they used me again? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push the thought away, but it clung like damp clothes. A soft knock pulled me back. The door creaked open and Clara stepped in, her gray hair tied back, a knitted scarf draped over her shoulders. She was our neighbor back home, the one who'd always slip me a cookie or ask about my day when Mom was too busy. Her eyes softened as she saw me, her steps slow but steady. "You look like you've been through it," she said, setting a small bag on the table. I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. Clara didn't push. She just sat, her presence warm like a blanket I didn't know I needed. She pulled out a thermos, pouring chamomile tea into a paper cup. The steam curled up, calming somehow. "Thought you could use something gentle," she said. I took the cup, my hands shaky, the warmth seeping into my palms. "Thanks," I whispered, my voice hoarse. Clara leaned back, her eyes searching mine. "You don't have to talk," she said. "But I'm here." I nodded, my throat tight. I wanted to tell her everything, to spill the words I'd heard, but they felt too heavy, too raw. Instead, I thought of another moment years back. I was 18, juggling school and a part-time job at a diner. Lucas had a bad spell, and I'd spent my savings on a new game for him, hoping it'd lift his spirits. I brought it to the hospital, excited to see him smile. When I got there, Mom was talking to a nurse, her voice sharp. "She's always so dependable," she said about me, but it didn't feel like praise. It felt like a chain. I handed Lucas the game and he grinned, but Mom barely looked at me. I left the room, my chest tight, telling myself I was selfish for wanting more. Now Clara's voice broke through. "You've always carried a lot, haven't you?" she said, her tone gentle but knowing. I looked at her, startled. How did she see it? I'd hidden it so well, even from myself. My eyes stung, and I blinked hard, focusing on the tea. I didn't know how to answer, didn't know if I could. The pain in my body, the pain in my heart, they were tangling together, and I wasn't sure which hurt more. The tea in my hands had gone lukewarm, but I kept holding it like it could anchor me. Clara's words hung in the air, heavy with truth I wasn't ready to face. "You've always carried a lot," she'd said. My chest tightened, a mix of gratitude and fear. She saw me, really saw me, in a way my parents never had. But that only made the ache worse because it meant I'd been invisible to them for years, maybe my whole life. I set the cup down, my fingers brushing the rough edge of the hospital tray. The room was dim now, the late afternoon light filtering through the blinds, casting thin shadows across the floor. My stitches pulled as I shifted, a sharp reminder of the surgery I still didn't understand. I wanted to ask Clara what she meant to spill everything, but my throat felt sealed shut. Instead, I looked at her, her kind eyes steady, and managed a weak nod. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small knitted bookmark, its edges frayed from use. "Found this in my old books," she said, sliding it toward me. "Thought it might keep you company." I took it, running my thumb over the soft yarn, and something in me cracked. It was such a small thing, but it felt like more than my parents had given me in years. My mind drifted back to when I was 20, working late shifts at the diner to help cover Lucas's medical bills. I'd come home exhausted, my sneakers caked with grease, only to find Mom sorting through insurance papers at the kitchen table. I'd made a joke trying to lighten the mood, something about how I smelled like French fries. She'd barely looked up, muttering Lucas's new meds are expensive. I'd swallowed the hurt, telling myself she was stressed, that it wasn't about me. But it was always about Lucas, wasn't it? Now the hospital door swung open, and Hannah the nurse stepped in, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. She carried a fresh pitcher of water, her face bright but tired. "You doing okay, Emily?" she asked, setting the pitcher down. I nodded, forcing a smile, but her eyes lingered like she could see the storm inside me. Clara stood, saying she'd give us a moment, and squeezed my hand before slipping out. Hannah adjusted my IV, her movements gentle. "You know," she said, "my sister and I used to fight over who got the last slice of pizza. But when push came to shove, she'd always have my back." Her voice was casual, but it hit me hard. I wanted that with Lucas, that easy loyalty, but all I could think of was how I'd given everything, and he'd taken it without a second thought. I thought of a night a few months back before the accident that landed me here. I'd been at the grocery store picking up stuff for dinner when Mom called, frantic. Lucas was having a rough day, and she needed me to drop everything and drive him to the clinic. I'd just gotten a promotion at work, my first real step up, and I'd wanted to celebrate, maybe crack open a bottle of cheap wine. But I'd said yes, like always, and spent the evening in a waiting room, my stomach growling my news unspoken. Hannah sat on the edge of my bed, her clipboard resting on her lap. "You ever feel like you're carrying more than you should?" she asked, her voice low. I froze, her words echoing Clara's. My eyes stung, and I looked away, focusing on the bookmark in my hands. "Yeah," I whispered, barely audible. She didn't push, just nodded and said, "You're stronger than you know, Emily. But even strong people need a break." She left to check on another patient, and I was alone again, the room too quiet. I clutched the bookmark, its texture grounding me as my thoughts spiraled. I thought of another moment when I was 22, right after I'd moved out for the first time. I'd invited my parents over to my tiny apartment, proud of the life I was building. I'd cooked lasagna, spent hours getting it right. They'd canceled last minute, saying Lucas had a fever. I'd eaten alone, the food cold by the time I gave up waiting. Now the weight of those moments pressed down, each one a brick I'd carried without question. I looked at the bookmark, then at the door where Clara had left. She'd seen me, Hannah had seen me, but my own family I wasn't sure anymore. My heart raced, a mix of anger and fear, as I realized I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. Something was breaking inside me, and I wasn't sure I could stop it. The hospital room felt like a cage, the air thick with the weight of what I couldn't unhear. Clara's bookmark lay on the tray beside me, its frayed edges a small comfort, but my mind was a storm. Hannah's words, "You're stronger than you know," echoed, but they didn't feel true. Not now. My body ached, the stitches across my abdomen pulling with every shallow breath, but the real pain was deeper, clawing at my heart. I'd spent my life being the dependable one, the daughter who never asked for anything, and for what? To be called a burden, to be used. I heard voices outside my door, low and urgent. My parents. Mom's voice was sharp like glass. "Lucas needs this more than she ever will." Dad's reply was softer, hesitant, but he didn't disagree. I froze, my hands gripping the thin blanket, my pulse hammering in my ears. They were talking about me, about whatever they'd done to me in that operating room. My stomach churned, a mix of dread and rage. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my body felt glued to the bed, heavy with painkillers and betrayal. I thought back to when I was 23, scraping by in a cramped apartment, working 2 jobs to help with Lucas's treatments. I'd been a cashier at a grocery store by day, then waited tables at a diner until midnight. My hands always smelled of coffee and dish soap, my feet sore from standing. One night I'd come home to find a voicemail from Mom asking me to cover another hospital bill. I'd just paid my rent, my bank account nearly empty, but I wired the money anyway. When I called to check in, Mom didn't even ask how I was. She just said, "Thank you, Emily. You're a lifesaver," and hung up. I'd stood in my kitchen staring at my cracked phone screen, feeling like I was disappearing. Now the door stayed closed, but their voices lingered, a poison I couldn't shake. I reached for the bookmark, tracing its stitches, trying to steady myself. My mind jumped to another memory, one that stung sharper now. I was 21, dating Ethan, the first guy who'd made me feel like I mattered. We'd been together a year, stealing moments between my shifts and Lucas's hospital stays. One evening we were at his place watching a movie, my head on his shoulder. He'd paused it and looked at me, his eyes serious. "You're killing yourself for them, Emily," he'd said. "You deserve a life too." I'd snapped, my voice louder than I meant. "Family comes first. You wouldn't get it." He'd gone quiet, and a month later he was gone. I'd told myself it was his fault that he didn't understand duty. But lying here now, I wondered if he'd been right. The door opened and Hannah slipped in, her face softening when she saw me. She carried a tray with a small cup of applesauce and a plastic spoon. "Thought you might try eating," she said, setting it down. I nodded, but my appetite was gone. She checked my chart, her movements quick but careful, then glanced at me. "You look like you're carrying the world," she said, her voice gentle. I wanted to tell her everything, to let the words pour out, but they stuck in my throat. Instead I asked, "Do you ever feel like your family doesn't see you?" Her eyes met mine, and for a moment she wasn't just a nurse. "My mom used to say I was her rock," she said. "But rocks get worn down too." She squeezed my shoulder and left her words settling heavy in my chest. I spooned the applesauce, the taste bland and grainy, forcing myself to swallow. My mind went to Aunt Patricia, Mom's older sister, who'd always had a way of making me feel small. Last summer at a family barbecue, she'd stood up, glass in hand, and toasted Lucas for his strength, calling him a miracle. Everyone clapped, their faces glowing with pride. I'd been there refilling the potato salad, my hands sticky from the heat. Patricia hadn't mentioned me, not once, even though I'd driven Lucas to every appointment that month. Later, she'd cornered me by the grill, her voice low. "You need to step up, Emily. Lucas deserves better." I'd mumbled something, my face burning, and walked away, pretending it didn't hurt. Now the hospital room was too quiet, the hum of the machines mocking me. I set the spoon down, my hands trembling. Patricia's words. Mom's dismissal, Dad's silence. They all piled up, a weight I couldn't carry anymore. I thought of Ethan again, his voice soft but firm. "You deserve a life too." My eyes stung, and I blinked hard, refusing to cry. But the anger was there, hot and sharp, growing with every heartbeat. I didn't know what they'd done to me, not yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't their rock anymore, and I wasn't sure I ever wanted to be again. The anger in my chest burned hotter, but it was tangled with something else, something heavier: guilt. I'd spent my life trying to be enough for them, and now knowing I wasn't felt like a punch I couldn't dodge. The hospital room was suffocating, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly, casting a sickly glow on the walls. My hands shook as I pushed the applesauce tray away, the plastic clattering against the metal rail of the bed. I needed answers, but the thought of facing my parents made my stomach twist. The door opened, and there they were, Mom and Dad stepping in like nothing was wrong. Mom's hair was pulled back tight, her smile forced like she was playing a part. Dad trailed behind, his shoulders slumped, avoiding my eyes. "You're looking better, honey," Mom said, her voice syrupy as she adjusted the pillow behind me. I stared at her, my throat dry. Better, my body felt like it had been torn apart, and they were acting like this was just another Tuesday. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "Why did I have surgery?" I asked, watching their faces. Mom's smile faltered just for a second before she waved a hand. "Oh, it was just routine, Emily. Something to keep you healthy." Dad nodded, muttering, "Yeah, routine." But his eyes darted to the floor, and I knew they were lying. My heart pounded, the monitor beeping faster, betraying me. Routine. Then why did I hear you say, "take her organ"? The words almost slipped out, but I bit them back, too raw, too scared of what they'd say. Instead, Mom launched into a monologue about Lucas, how his latest tests were promising, how strong he was being. Her voice was bright, but it grated, each word a reminder of who mattered more. Dad stood silent, picking at his thumbnail, and I wanted to scream at him, to look at me, to see me. But I just sat there, my fingers twisting the blanket, feeling smaller with every second. I thought of a moment last fall when I'd begged them to come to my promotion party at work. I'd been made team lead, a big deal for me, something I'd earned. They'd promised to show, but when the night came, they called saying Lucas had a fever. I'd stood in the break room surrounded by coworkers, forcing a smile as I cut the cake alone. Now Mom was still talking, her hands fluttering as she described Lucas's new treatment plan. I tuned her out, my mind drifting to Sarah, my friend from work. She'd been the one at that party pouring me a soda, telling me I deserved better. A few weeks ago, we'd grabbed coffee, and she'd leaned across the table, her voice low. "Your parents lean on you too hard, Emily. It's not fair." I'd brushed her off, saying she didn't understand that family was everything. But now her words felt like a lifeline I'd ignored, and I hated myself for it. The door creaked and Clara stepped in her presence, a quiet relief. She carried a small paper bag, probably more tea or another thoughtful gift. Mom stopped mid-sentence, her lips pursing as Clara set the bag on the table. "I should get back to Lucas," Mom said, her tone clipped like Clara was an intruder. Dad mumbled something about checking the car, and they left, the door clicking shut behind them. Clara sat, her eyes searching mine. "They don't deserve you," she said, her voice soft but firm. I looked away, my throat burning. I wanted to believe her, but it hurt too much. I thought of another time when I was 24, planning a weekend away, my first real break in years. I'd saved up for a cheap cabin by the lake, dreaming of quiet mornings with a book. The day before I was set to leave, Mom called saying Lucas needed me to stay with him while they met with a specialist. I'd canceled the trip, my refund barely covering the deposit. When I told Mom, she'd said, "You're so good to us, Emily," like that was enough. I'd spent the weekend watching Lucas play video games, my heart sinking with every laugh he let out because I loved him. I was drowning. Now Clara opened the bag, pulling out a tiny potted plant, its leaves a soft green. "Something to brighten your day," she said, setting it by the window. I stared at it, my vision blurring. It was beautiful, but it felt like a cruel joke. How could anything brighten this? My parents' lies. Their casual dismissal, the way they'd walked out without asking how I felt, it was all too much. I gripped the bed rail. My knuckles white as a wave of rage and grief crashed over me. I didn't know what they'd taken from me, but I knew it was more than just an organ. They'd taken my trust, my place in their world, and I wasn't sure I'd ever get it back. The potted plant Clara left sat on the windowsill, its green leaves mocking the chaos inside me. My parents' lies. Their fake smiles had cracked something open and I couldn't keep it locked away anymore. I was 26. Emily, the daughter who'd given everything, and now I was done swallowing their excuses. The hospital room smelled of bleach, the air heavy, but my mind was clear for the first time in days. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I pressed the call button, my hands steady despite the pain radiating from my stitches. Hannah appeared, her ponytail swinging as she stepped in. "Can you get my parents?" I asked, my voice firm. She nodded, sensing something different in me, and left without a word. I sat up, wincing as the IV tugged at my arm, and rehearsed what I'd say. No more dodging, no more pretending. I was going to make them face me. Minutes later, Mom and Dad walked in, Mom's purse clutched tight, Dad's hands stuffed in his pockets. "You're up," Mom said, her tone too bright, like she was talking to a child. Dad offered a weak smile, his eyes flicking to the floor. I didn't smile back. "Sit down," I said, my voice low but sharp. They hesitated, exchanging a glance, then sat, the plastic chairs creaking. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint drip of my IV. I took a breath, my heart pounding. "I heard you," I said, each word deliberate. "In the hall. Talking about taking my organ for Lucas." Mom's face froze, her lips parting, but no sound came out. Dad shifted, his jaw tightening. "What was the surgery really?" I pressed, leaning forward, ignoring the stab of pain in my side. "Tell me the truth." Mom recovered first, her voice smooth. "Emily, you're confused. It was just a procedure to help you both." "Both," I snapped. "Then why did you say I was a burden?" Mom flinched, her eyes narrowing. "You're twisting things," she said, but her voice shook. Dad cleared his throat. "Let's calm down," he said, like I was the problem. My anger surged, hot and unstoppable. "No," I said louder now. "I'm done calming down. You used me. For Lucas. Again." Mom stood, her purse hitting the floor. "That's enough, Emily. We did what was best for the family." I laughed, bitter and raw. "Best for Lucas, you mean? When was it ever about me?" The door opened and Lucas shuffled in, his face pale, a hospital band still on his wrist. He looked between us, confused. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice soft. My heart twisted. I loved him, but right now, he was part of this. "Did you know?" I asked, my eyes locked on his, "about the surgery?" He blinked, his mouth opening, then closing. He started but trailed off, his gaze dropping. That was enough. He knew. My brother, the one I'd protected my whole life, had let them cut me open. I thought of a moment when I was 19, sitting in a hospital waiting room while Lucas had another procedure. I'd brought my sketchbook drawing to pass the time, my fingers smudged with charcoal. A nurse had stopped by, glancing at my work. "You're talented," she'd said, smiling. I'd blushed, mumbling thanks, but when Mom came out, she didn't ask about my day. She just handed me Lucas's jacket and said, "Keep an eye on him." I'd tucked the sketchbook away, my dreams buried with it. Now Mom stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. "You owe Lucas this, Emily. You're healthy. He's not. It's your duty. Duty." The word hit like a slap. My vision blurred, not from tears but from rage. "Duty?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "I've given you everything, my time, my money, my health. When did you ever care about me?" Dad stood, reaching for Mom's arm, but she shook him off, her eyes cold. "You're being selfish," she said, and I felt the room spin. Hannah slipped in, her face tense, clearly hearing the shouting. She hovered by the door, ready to step in, but I barely noticed. My focus was on Mom, her words slicing deeper than any scalpel. "Selfish," I whispered, my voice breaking. I was shaking my stitches, screaming, but I didn't care. "You took my choice, my body, and you call me selfish." Mom's face hardened, and then in a flash, her hand swung, striking my cheek. The sound echoed sharp and final, and everything stopped. My cheek stung, the heat of Mom's slap spreading like wildfire. The room was frozen, Lucas's eyes wide. Dad's hand still on Mom's arm, Hannah hovering by the door. her clipboard clutched tight. I touched my face, the skin tender, and something inside me shattered. I'd given them my life, my body, and now this. My stitches ached, but it was nothing compared to the hollowness in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body betrayed me, pinning me to the bed. Mom's face twisted, a mix of defiance and something like regret, but she didn't apologize. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, her voice low, as if I was the one who'd crossed a line. "Harder," I choked out, my voice raw. "You cut me open without asking. You took part of me." Lucas shifted his sneakers, scuffing the floor, and I turned on him. "And you," I said, my words sharp. "You let them." He flinched, his mouth opening, but no words came. I didn't care. The truth was out, jagged and ugly, and I couldn't take it back. I thought of a winter when I was 17, shoveling snow from our driveway so Dad could take Lucas to dialysis. My fingers were numb, my coat too thin, but I kept going, knowing it mattered. When I came inside, Mom handed me a mug of cocoa, her smile brief. "You're our rock," she'd said, and I'd clung to that thinking it meant love. Now I saw it for what it was, a leash. They'd never seen me, not really, just what I could do for them. Hannah stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "I think you all need a moment," she said, looking at Mom. "Let's step outside." Mom glared, but Dad tugged her arm, muttering, "Come on, Margaret." They left, the door swinging shut, leaving me with Lucas and Hannah. Lucas looked at me, his eyes wet. I didn't mean," he started, but I cut him off. "Don't," I said, my voice cold. "Just don't." He nodded, his shoulders sagging, and shuffled out, his head down. Hannah stayed checking my monitor, her hands steady but her eyes soft. "You didn't deserve that," she said quietly. I looked at her, my throat tight, unable to speak. She didn't push, just adjusted my blanket and said, "I'll be back soon." When she left, the silence was deafening, the room too small for the storm inside me. I thought of a moment last year when I'd found an old photo of me and Lucas at a fair, both of us grinning, cotton candy staining our fingers. I'd tucked it into my wallet, a reminder of when things felt simple. Now that memory felt like a lie, tainted by what they'd done. I reached for the potted plant, its leaves soft under my fingers, but it couldn't ground me anymore. My mind raced, piecing together fragments. The rushed surgery, the vague explanations, Mom's cold words in the hall. I needed my medical records, needed to know exactly what they'd taken. I pressed the call button again, and when Hannah returned, I asked, "Can you get my chart? I need to see it." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll try," she said, but her tone told me it wouldn't be easy. While I waited, I thought of Sarah again, her voice sharp over coffee last month. "You're not their servant, Emily. You're allowed to say no." I'd laughed it off, but now her words burned a truth I'd been too scared to face. I'd said yes to everything, to every sacrifice, thinking it made me good, made me family. But what had it gotten me? A scar across my stomach, a family who didn't care, and a brother who'd stood by while they carved me up. Hannah came back, her face grim, holding a thin folder. "I got what I could," she said, handing it over. "But Emily, it's not complete." I opened it, my hands shaking, and scanned the pages. Words jumped out: donor kidney urgent. My breath caught. They'd taken my kidney, rushed it for Lucas, no consent, no discussion. The risks were there too, buried in fine print: complications, long-term health issues. My vision blurred, not from tears but from a rage so deep it felt like drowning. They'd stolen part of me, and they didn't even think I deserved to know. I dropped the folder, my hands numbed, the pages scattering on the bed. The room spun, the walls closing in, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat, loud and broken. I was empty, betrayed, and alone, with no way to undo what they'd done. The scattered pages of my medical chart lay across the bed, each word a wound I couldn't unsee. Kidney donor. No consent. Complications. I was 26. Emily and my parents had carved out a piece of me like I was spare parts. The hospital room felt like a tomb, the air stale, but something in me was waking up. I wasn't their rock anymore. I wasn't their burden. I was done letting them decide who I was. Hannah's footsteps faded as she left, promising to check on me later. I gathered the pages, my hands steady despite the ache in my abdomen. The stitches pulled a sharp reminder of what they'd taken, but I pushed through, stacking the papers neatly. I needed to move, to do something, anything to reclaim the choice they'd stolen. My eyes landed on Clara's potted plant, its leaves catching the dim light. She'd believed in me, seen me when no one else did. I owed it to her, to myself, to fight back. I was discharged the next day, my legs wobbly, but my resolve firm. Clara insisted I stay with her, her small house a haven of warmth, with quilted blankets and the faint smell of lavender. Her guest room had a creaky bed and a window overlooking her garden where daisies swayed in the breeze. "You take all the time you need," she said, setting a mug of peppermint tea on the nightstand. I nodded, my throat tight, grateful for a place to breathe. That afternoon, I sat at Clara's kitchen table, the wood worn smooth from years of use. Hannah had texted suggesting a lawyer she knew, Rebecca, who handled medical cases. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the number. Suing felt huge, like a wall I wasn't sure I could climb. But then I thought of Mom's slap, Dad's silence, Lucas's complicity. They'd taken my kidney, my trust, my voice. I dialed, my heart racing, and when Rebecca answered, her voice calm and steady, I felt a spark of hope. Rebecca met me the next day at a coffee shop, its walls lined with local art, the air thick with the scent of roasted beans. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a notepad already open. I told her everything, my voice low but steady, the words spilling out, the overheard conversation, the forged consent, the risks buried in my chart. She listened, jotting notes, her pen scratching softly. "This is serious, Emily," she said, setting her pen down. "They violated your rights. We can build a case against the hospital, maybe even your parents." I swallowed, the weight of her words sinking in. A case. It felt real, like a door I could walk through. I thought of a time when I was 22, organizing a bake sale for Lucas's treatments. I'd spent days baking cookies, my kitchen a mess of flour and sugar, hoping to raise a few $100. When I handed Mom the cash, she'd hugged me saying, "You're our angel." I'd glowed, thinking I'd made a difference. Now I saw it differently. They'd taken my effort, my love, and given nothing back. Rebecca's offer was a chance to take something for myself, to demand justice. Back at Clara's, I sat on the porch, a notebook in my lap, the evening air cool against my skin. I started writing, not a journal, a letter, one I'd share with the world. My pen moved fast, the words raw and unfiltered. I wrote about the surgery, the betrayal, the years I'd spent invisible. Each sentence felt like a brick building, something solid, something mine. Clara joined me, a shawl around her shoulders, and read a page. "This is powerful," she said, her eyes shining. "You're finding your voice." I thought of Sarah, my friend from work, who'd always pushed me to stand up for myself. Last year, we'd gone hiking the trail, steep and muddy, and she'd laughed when I hesitated at a stream. "You're tougher than you think," she'd said, grabbing my hand to pull me across. Now I needed that toughness. I texted her, asking if she'd help me share the letter, maybe online where it could reach others. She replied instantly, "Absolutely. Let's do this." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky pink, I closed the notebook, my fingers tingling with purpose. I wasn't just Emily, the sister who gave everything. I was Emily, the woman who'd been broken but was stitching herself back together. The fight was just beginning, and for the first time I felt ready to face it. The notebook in my lap felt heavier now, its pages filled with words I'd never dared to say aloud. I was still at Clara's, the porch creaking under my chair, the night air carrying the scent of her garden. I was 26. Emily, and for the first time I was choosing myself. The letter I'd started wasn't just a story. It was a declaration, a line in the sand. I wasn't invisible anymore, and I was done letting my parents' betrayal define me. The next morning I drove to my parents' house, Sarah beside me in the passenger seat. Her presence a quiet strength. The familiar street felt foreign now, the oak trees lining the road casting long shadows. I parked in the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my stitches a dull ache under my shirt. "You've got this," Sarah said, her voice steady. I nodded, but my heart was racing. I needed to face them, not to beg, but to demand they see me. We walked up the porch steps, the wood worn from years of my footsteps. I knocked, and when Mom opened the door, her face tightened, her eyes flicking to Sarah. "Emily," she said, her tone clipped. "What's this about?" I took a breath, my voice calm but firm. "We need to talk. Now." She hesitated, then stepped aside, and we entered the living room, the air thick with the smell of her lavender candles. Dad was there, sitting on the couch, a newspaper folded in his lap. He looked up, his brow furrowing. I didn't sit. I stood Sarah at my side and let the words come. "You took my kidney without my consent," I said, each word deliberate. "You lied to me, used me, and called me selfish when I asked why." Mom's lips pursed and she started to speak, but I cut her off. "No. You listen. I gave you everything my whole life and you threw it away. I deserve an apology." Mom's face reddened. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said. "We saved Lucas. You should be grateful." "Grateful?" I laughed, sharp and bitter. "For what? Being your sacrifice." Dad shifted his voice low. "Emily, let's not do this," but I wasn't backing down. "You chose Lucas over me," I said, looking at him. "You let her slap me. Live with that." Mom's eyes flashed, but she didn't speak. Sarah squeezed my arm, a silent anchor, and I felt stronger, taller, like I was finally taking up space. I turned and left the door, clicking shut behind us, my chest lighter despite the pain. Back at Clara's, I opened my laptop, the screen glowing in the dim kitchen. Sarah sat across from me, sipping tea as I typed the final lines of my letter. I titled it, "I was torn from my brother, each word a piece of my truth." I read it aloud to Sarah, my voice shaking but clear, detailing the surgery, the betrayal, the years I'd spent in their shadow. She nodded, her eyes shining. "This is you, Emily. The real you." I hit publish, posting it to a local blog, my heart pounding as the page loaded. By morning, the letter had spread, shared across social media, comments pouring in from strangers. I read them at Clara's table, my coffee growing cold. "I was in your shoes," one wrote. "My family used me too." Another said, "You're so brave. Keep fighting." Each message was a thread weaving me into a community I'd never known existed. I wasn't alone anymore, and that felt like a victory, small but real. Rebecca called, her voice brisk with news. "The hospital's nervous," she said. "Your letter's making waves. We've got evidence they rushed the surgery because your mom pushed them. She's on the board, pulled strings." I froze, the phone heavy in my hand. Mom's influence, her power, had shaped my pain. It wasn't just neglect. It was manipulation. I thanked Rebecca, my mind reeling, and hung up, staring at the table, the grain of the wood blurring. Later, I walked to Clara's garden, the grass damp under my shoes. She was there, pruning roses, her hands steady. I told her about the letter, the comments, Rebecca's call. She set her shears down, her smile soft. "You're building something, Emily. Not just for you, but for others." I nodded, my throat tight, and knelt beside her, touching the soil, its coolness grounding me. That evening, I got a text from Lucas, his words hesitant. "Can we talk? I'm sorry." I stared at the screen, my finger hovering. I loved him, but I wasn't ready. I typed, "Not yet," and hit send, my heart aching, but firm. I set the phone down, the silence in Clara's kitchen wrapping around me. I looked at the letter open on my laptop, its words glowing, and felt a quiet strength settle in my bones. I was no longer their shadow. I was Emily, and I was enough. I stood by Clara's window, Lucas's letter heavy in my pocket, its words like stones I couldn't shake off. I was 26. Emily and my fight for myself had set things in motion I hadn't foreseen. The world outside was quiet, the streetlights flickering on, but inside me there was no calm. My letter had cracked open a truth, and now the pieces were falling sharp and unyielding, cutting everyone in their path. By noon, my letter had sparked more than I'd expected. Rebecca called, her voice clipped with urgency. "The hospital's under scrutiny," she said. "Local news picked up your story. They're launching an investigation into their consent protocols. Your mom's board position is shaky." I sat at Clara's table, a glass of water sweating in my hand, my mind racing. An investigation. It was what I'd wanted, but it felt bigger than me now, like a wave I'd started but couldn't control. I stepped outside, needing air, the gravel crunching under my shoes. Clara's garden was quiet, the roses still blooming despite the chill. I thought of a moment when I was 20, sitting in a community college classroom scribbling notes for a psychology class. My professor had talked about boundaries, how they protect you. I'd nodded, but it felt abstract, like something for other people. Now I understood. My letter was a boundary, a wall I'd built to keep my parents' choices from swallowing me whole. My phone buzzed a message from an old family friend, Linda. "I heard about your post," she wrote. "How could you do this to your parents? They're devastated." My stomach twisted, a mix of guilt and defiance. Devastated. They'd taken my kidney, lied to my face, and now I was the villain. I didn't reply, but Linda's words lingered, a splinter I couldn't pull out. I wondered who else was talking, what stories Mom was spinning to save face. Sarah texted next, her message brighter. "Community Center wants to host a talk for you. People are inspired, Em. You in?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. A talk. The idea terrified me, standing in front of strangers, my scars laid bare. But it also felt right, like a way to keep the momentum going. I typed, "Let's do it," and hit send, my heart pounding. Sarah replied with a thumbs up, and I smiled, her support a lifeline in the chaos. Back inside, Clara was at the stove, stirring a pot of vegetable soup, the aroma filling the room. She glanced over, her eyes, kind but searching. "You're stirring up a lot," she said, ladling soup into a bowl. "You okay with that?" I sat the bowl warm in my hands and nodded. "I think so," I said, but my voice wavered. She didn't push, just slid a spoon across the table, her quiet trust steadying me. I thought of a time when I was 23, helping Lucas with his college applications. I'd stayed up late editing his essays, my own dreams of grad school pushed aside. When he got accepted, Mom threw a party, her laughter loud as she toasted his future. I'd stood in the corner sipping soda, my role unspoken. Now I saw it clearly. I'd been their scaffold, holding them up while I crumbled. The letter was my way of stepping out from under their weight. My phone buzzed again, this time an email from a journalist, Natalie, asking for an interview. She'd read my letter, wanted to feature my story in a local paper. I hesitated. The idea of my face, my name out there for everyone to judge, made my skin crawl. But then I thought of the comments, the strangers who'd said I'd given them courage. I replied, agreeing to meet, my fingers trembling as I typed. As I set the phone down, a letter slipped through Clara's mail slot, the handwriting unmistakably Lucas's. I picked it up, my heart sinking. "Dear Em," it began. I knew about the surgery. I was scared, didn't know how to stop it. "I'm sorry." I read it twice, my chest tight. He'd known, and he'd let it happen. I loved him, but this was a new kind of hurt, sharp and personal. I folded the letter, tucking it into my pocket, unable to respond. I stood by Clara's window, the glass cool against my palm, watching the street outside. The world was moving, reacting because of me. But inside, I felt a strange stillness, like I was holding my breath, waiting for the next blow. My parents' silence, Linda's judgment, Lucas's confession, they were all pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I could solve. I was free, but I was raw, and the cost of my truth was heavier than I'd expected. I stood by Clara's window. Lucas's letter heavy in my pocket, its words like stones I couldn't shake off. I was 26. Emily and my fight for myself had set things in motion I hadn't foreseen. The world outside was quiet, the streetlights flickering on, but inside me there was no calm. My letter had cracked open a truth, and now the pieces were falling sharp and unyielding, cutting everyone in their path. The next day, I met Natalie at a diner. Its booths warmed the air thick with the smell of fried eggs and syrup. She was younger than I'd expected, her notebook already open, her questions gentle but precise. I spoke slowly, my voice steady as I recounted the hospital, the betrayal, the scar I'd carry forever. She listened, her pen moving fast, and when I finished, she looked at me, her eyes soft. "This will change things, Emily," she said. "People need to hear this." I nodded, but my chest tightened, unsure if I was ready for the world to know my pain. Back at Clara's, I found her on the couch, a blanket over her lap, her face pale. She'd caught a cold, her cough rough, and I insisted she rest. I made her tea, the kettle hissing as I moved through her kitchen, my hands busy to keep my mind still. "You don't have to fuss," she said, but her smile was grateful. I sat beside her, the mug warm in my hands, and realized she was the family I'd chosen, the one who'd never asked me to be less. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "Hospital's board meeting tomorrow. Rumor is your mom's out." I stared at the screen, my breath catching. Mom forced to step down. It should have felt like a win, but it didn't. It felt like another piece of my family crumbling, and I was the one holding the hammer. I thought of a moment when I was 21 helping Mom repaint the living room, the walls a soft blue. We'd laughed, paint smudging our hands, and for a moment I'd felt close to her. Now that memory was ash burned by what she'd done. The article came out the next morning, my story on the front page of the local paper, my name in bold. I read it at Clara's table, my coffee untouched, the words blurring. Natalie had captured everything: the pain, the injustice, Mom's role in pushing the hospital. Comments flooded the paper's website, some calling me brave, others accusing me of tearing my family apart. One stung most: she's ungrateful. Her brother needed her. I closed my laptop, my hands cold, the doubt creeping back. Sarah stopped by, her energy bright despite the gray day. She'd organized a small event at the community center, a chance for people to share stories like mine. "You don't have to speak," she said, "but it could help." I nodded, my throat tight, but the idea of standing with others, of not being alone, felt like a lifeline. She hugged me, her warmth grounding, and left, promising to check in later. That afternoon, Mom showed up at Clara's, her coat buttoned tight, her face drawn. I opened the door, my heart pounding, and let her in. Clara was resting upstairs, the house quiet. Mom didn't sit, her hands twisting together. "You've gone too far, Emily," she said, her voice low, trembling. "The board, my reputation, it's all ruined." I stared at her, my jaw tight. "You ruined us," I said, my words slow. "You chose this." Her eyes filled, but I saw no apology, only desperation. "Please," she said, "stop this. For Lucas, for me." I wanted to scream, to tell her she didn't get to ask that, but I didn't. I opened the door, my hand steady. "Leave," I said, my voice cold. She hesitated, her lips parting, then walked out, her footsteps fading. I closed the door, my back against it, and slid to the floor, my stitches aching. The silence was heavy, broken only by Clara's faint cough upstairs. I'd won, hadn't I? The hospital was changing, Mom was falling, my story was heard. But why did it feel like I'd lost something too? I sat there, the letter in my pocket, the weight of my choices pressing down, and felt the quiet ache of a world I'd broken open. I moved into my own place a week after Mom left Clara's, a small apartment with creaky floors and a view of the park. I was 27 now. Emily, in the quiet of my new space, felt like a gift, like I could finally hear my own thoughts. The walls were bare, but I'd hung a single photo, one of me and Clara at her garden, her smile wide, my hand on her shoulder. It was a reminder of what I'd found, even after everything I'd lost. My first night, I sat on the couch, a thrift store find with faded blue cushions, and sipped chamomile tea from a chipped mug. The city hummed outside, distant car horns blending with the rustle of leaves. I'd started therapy, something Hannah had suggested before I left the hospital. My therapist, Dr. Elise, had a calm voice and a knack for asking questions that cut deep. In our first session, she'd asked, "What do you want for yourself, Emily?" I'd stared at her, my mind blank. For so long, I'd lived for others, their needs my compass. Now I was learning to draw my own map. I thought of a summer when I was 15, riding my bike through our neighborhood, the wind cool against my skin. I'd stop by the creek, tossing pebbles into the water, watching the ripples spread. Those moments were mine, stolen from a life of duty, and I'd felt free, like I could be anyone. Now in my apartment, I was finding that girl again, piece by piece. I'd bought a sketch pad, my first in years, and started drawing again, simple things like the park's oak trees or my coffee mug. Each line felt like a step toward something new. Clara visited the next day. Her cough gone, her energy back. She brought a photo album, its cover soft leather filled with pictures of us baking cookies in her kitchen, laughing at a street fair planting bulbs last spring. "You've come a long way," she said, handing it to me. I flipped through it, my throat tight, seeing not just her but me, someone I was starting to recognize. We sat on my balcony, the air crisp, and shared a pot of coffee, her stories of her youth mixing with mine. She was my anchor, the family I'd chosen when mine had failed me. I'd started volunteering at a local support group, a place for people who'd felt used or unseen by their families. The first meeting was in a community center, its walls painted a soft yellow folding chairs in a circle. I listened as a woman named Tara shared her story, her voice shaking as she described giving up her dreams for her siblings. I spoke next, my words halting but honest about the hospital, the letter, the fight to be seen. The group nodded, their eyes kind, and I felt a connection like we were all mending together. Sarah threw a surprise party for my birthday, my first in the new apartment. She decorated with paper lanterns, their glow warm against the walls. The room filled with people from the support group, their laughter soft, their stories shared over pizza and soda. Tara gave me a handmade card, her handwriting neat. "You've given me hope," it read. I hugged her, my eyes stinging, and realized I was building something not just for me but for others. The cake was chocolate, my favorite, and as I blew out the candles, I didn't wish for anything. I was here, and that was enough. Later alone, I opened the photo album again, tracing the edges of a picture from last fall, me and Clara, at a farmer's market, apples spilling from our bags. I thought of Dr. Elise's question, "What do you want?" I wanted this moments that were mine, people who saw me a life where I wasn't defined by what I gave. I set the album down, the apartment quiet, and stood by the window watching the park's trees sway. My breath slowed steady and sure, and for the first time I felt like I was home. The park outside my window was still, the morning light filtering through the trees, casting soft patterns on my floor. I was 27. Emily in my apartment, with its mismatched furniture and half-painted walls, was starting to feel like mine. The weight of my past hadn't vanished, but it was lighter now, like a stone I'd learned to carry. I sipped coffee, the mug warm in my hands, and let the quiet settle around me, a peace I'd fought to find. I met Lucas for coffee that week, our first real talk since the hospital. We chose a small cafe, its tables wobbly, the air thick with the scent of fresh pastries. He looked older, his eyes tired but clear. "I'm trying to understand what I did," he said, stirring his drink, his voice low. "I hurt you, and I hate that." I listened, my hands folded, feeling the ache of our history, but also something new, a willingness to hear him. "I'm not ready to forgive," I said, "but I want to try." He nodded, his relief quiet, and we agreed to take it slow, one step at a time. I thought of a moment when I was 18, studying late in my room, the desk lamp buzzing. I'd been accepted to a local college, a small victory I'd earned alone. I'd wanted to tell my parents to see their pride, but they were at the hospital with Lucas as always. I'd taped the acceptance letter to my mirror, a silent promise to myself. Now I was keeping that promise, not for them, but for me. The hospital sent a letter, formal and typed, announcing new consent policies, my case cited as the catalyst. I read it at my kitchen counter, the paper crisp under my fingers, and felt a flicker of pride. It wasn't an apology, but it was proof I'd made a difference. I tucked the letter into a drawer, not needing to hold on to it. The fight had shaped me, but it wasn't all I was. Ethan called, his voice warm through the phone. We'd been talking again, small steps toward something new. "Want to grab dinner?" he asked, and I said yes, surprising myself. We met at a taco stand, the night air cool, the neon sign buzzing above us. He listened as I talked about my volunteering, my sketches, my therapy, his eyes steady, seeing me in a way I hadn't known I needed. I didn't know where it would lead, but I was open, and that felt like enough. Clara invited me to her garden that weekend, her hands dusty from digging. We planted a small maple tree, its roots wrapped in burlap, the soil soft under our fingers. "This is for you," she said, her voice gentle. "For everything you're becoming." We packed the earth around it, our breaths visible in the chilly air, and I felt a quiet strength like I was rooting myself too. The tree stood small but sturdy, a marker of something lasting. Back home, I pulled out my sketch pad, the pages filled with new drawings, Clara's tree, the cafe's wobbly tables, Ethan's smile. Each one was a piece of this life I was building, not perfect, but mine. I thought of Dr. Elise's words from our last session. "You're allowed to be happy, Emily." I hadn't believed her at first, but now I was starting to. Happiness wasn't loud or certain. It was these moments, small and real, stacking up like stones in a river. I stood by my window again, the park now golden in the evening light. The trees swayed their leaves, catching the breeze, and I watched them, my breath slow, my heart steady. I wasn't the girl who'd given everything anymore, nor the one who'd broken under betrayal. I was just Emily, standing here ready for whatever came next. The world was still, and so was I, holding this fragile, precious piece. My apartment was quiet, the morning light slipping through the curtains, painting soft stripes across the hardwood. I was 27. Emily in this space with its second-hand bookshelves and a single potted fern was my own. I sat at my small table, a cup of tea steaming beside me, the faint bitterness of Earl Grey grounding me. The past year had been a storm, but now I was learning to live in the calm that followed, stitching myself back together one careful thread at a time. I'd started a new routine, waking early to walk in the park across the street. The paths were lined with gravel crunching under my sneakers, and I'd watch the joggers, the dog walkers, the world waking up. Each step felt like a choice, a way to claim my body back after what my parents had taken. I'd stop by a bench, my breath visible in the cool air, and just sit, letting the stillness sink in. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about making room for something new. Work had changed too. I'd taken a new role, training new hires at the office. My voice steadier now when I spoke. My desk had a small frame, a photo of me at the community center speaking at a support group. That night I'd shared my story. My hands trembling, but my words clear, and the room had listened, their nods, a quiet strength. I wasn't just the girl who'd been betrayed anymore. I was someone who could help others find their way out too. Clara had become a constant, her house a second home. We'd started cooking together on Sundays, her kitchen warm with the smell of fresh bread and herbs. She'd teach me recipes, her hands quick as she chopped onions, her stories of her youth weaving through our laughter. Last week she'd given me a recipe card, her handwriting neat for her mother's soup. "Keep this," she said, her eyes soft. "It's yours now." I'd tucked it into my bag, my heart full, knowing she was giving me more than just a recipe. I thought of a moment a month ago, standing in my bathroom looking at the scar across my abdomen. It was faded now, a thin line under my fingers, no longer angry. I'd traced it not with pain, but with a strange acceptance. It was part of me, a mark of what I'd survived, but it didn't own me. I'd pulled on a sweater, grabbed my keys, and gone to meet Ethan for coffee, my steps lighter than they'd been in years. Ethan and I were taking things slow, our dates simple, like walks by the river or late-night diner runs. He'd listen when I talked about my therapy, my volunteering his questions, gentle but real. Last night we'd sat on a park bench, the stars faint above the city glow, and he'd said, "You're different now, Em. Stronger." I'd smiled, not sure if he was right, but wanting to believe him. I was trying, and that was enough. I'd seen my parents once since Mom's visit to Clara's. They'd asked to meet at a neutral spot, a quiet cafe with wooden tables and the hum of conversation. I'd gone not for them, but for me, to see if I could face them without breaking. They'd offered a stilted apology, their words careful, like they were reading a script. "We're sorry you felt hurt." Mom had said, her hands folded tight. Dad had nodded, his eyes on his coffee. I'd listened, my face calm, and said I needed more than that. Then I'd left the door, jingling behind me, my heart steady. I didn't need their validation anymore. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop, checking emails from the support group. A new member had written thanking me for sharing my story, saying it gave her courage to set boundaries with her family. I replied, my fingers quick, offering to meet for coffee. I wasn't fixed, wasn't whole, but I was enough to help, and that felt like a kind of healing. I closed the laptop, the tea now cool, and stood my breath slow, the world outside waiting. I was ready to meet it not as a shadow, but as myself. The fern on my windowsill swayed slightly, catching the afternoon breeze that slipped through the cracked window. I was 27. Emily in my apartment, with its soft hum of city noise, was a place where I could finally exhale. The scars of my past, both the one on my skin and the ones deeper, hadn't vanished, but I'd learned to carry them differently, not as weights, but as part of the map that led me here. I stood by the window, a glass of water in my hand, the coolness soothing, and let myself think about what it all meant. I'd started writing again, not letters or sketches, but short stories, snippets of lives I imagined in the park. I'd sit on my balcony, a notebook open, and write about a woman selling flowers, her hands quick, her smile tired, but real. Or a boy on a skateboard, his laughter sharp as he raced the wind. Each story was a way to see the world, to find beauty in its smallness, and it taught me to see myself too, not as a victim, but as someone still growing, still possible. Lucas and I had another meeting, this time at a community center, a counselor sitting between us. The room smelled of fresh paint, the chairs hard but warm from the sun. He spoke first, his voice low, about his guilt, his fear how he'd been too weak to question our parents. I listened, my hands still, and shared my own truth, how his silence had cut me. We didn't hug, didn't cry, but we agreed to keep talking, to rebuild something new. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start, and that was enough for now. I'd been invited to speak at a conference, a national event on medical ethics, my story now, a case study in consent. I stood on a stage in a borrowed blazer, the lights bright, the crowd a sea of faces. My voice shook at first, but as I spoke about the hospital, my parents, the letter that changed everything, it steadied. The applause was soft, respectful, and when a woman approached me, after tears in her eyes, saying my words gave her strength, I felt a purpose I'd never known. I wasn't just healing, I was helping others heal too. Clara and I had a new tradition: afternoon walks in her neighborhood, her arm linked with mine. We'd pass houses with peeling paint, kids on bikes, the air sharp with fall. She'd point out birds, naming them, her voice bright. Last week we'd stopped by a pond, its surface still reflecting the sky. "You're like this water," she said, her hand on my shoulder. Calm now, but deep. I'd smiled, my heart full, knowing she saw me, truly saw me, and that was a gift I'd carry always. I thought of a moment last month, standing in a bookstore, my fingers tracing the spines of novels. I'd bought one, a story about a woman finding her way after loss, and read it in one night, my lamp casting a soft glow. It wasn't my story, but it felt close, like a mirror held up to my own journey. I'd closed it, my eyes heavy, and realized I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was building on it, using its broken pieces to make something whole. The lesson came to me slowly, not in a flash, but in these quiet moments. I'd spent years thinking my worth was in what I gave, that love meant sacrifice, that family was a debt I had to pay. But I was wrong. My worth was in me and the way I chose to live, to love, to keep going. I'd been torn apart, yes, but I'd found a way to stitch myself back together, not for anyone else, but for the woman I was becoming. I didn't need to be their hero or their burden. I just needed to be Emily, and that was enough. I set the glass down, the water rippling slightly, and looked out at the city, its lights beginning to flicker on. The world was wide, and I was part of it, not as a shadow, but as a voice, soft but sure. I took a breath, slow and deep, and let it go, ready for whatever came next. What's a moment that made you realize your own strength? Share it below. Let's connect through our stories. If this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to healing, to finding our way, one step at a time.